welcome to episode number 73 of the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Tempe. Today we've got Satyam Kantamneni joining us as our fourth guest in our mini-series on the importance of building the skill of data literacy in individuals and in teams. Satyam is managing partner at UX Reactor, a leading user experience design consulting and training company based in Pleasanton, California. He's also the author of the new book, User Experience Design, a practical playbook to fuel business growth. Thank you so much for sharing your talents and insights with us today, Satyam.
Thank you, Andy. It's my privilege to be here.
Excellent. Well, we ask these first two questions of all of our guests, and today will be no exception. Before we get started, it would be great if you told our listeners your story.
The summary of my story is I'm a designer by choice and engineer by training. And then fortunately also trained as a business, in business skills. So in that story is that I actually have enjoyed my background in engineering, design, and business. And that's been my calling for the last 15 years. I've been in this line of work now for a little over 20 years, but the intersection of those three has really intrigued me over the last 15. And that's what I've been trying to do for the last 8 years, running my own firm around it. It's a very interesting intersection. It's an intersection where Apple has built the most valuable company. It's an intersection where Tesla has become the most valuable company, and we keep unlocking that with a lot of our clients. It's a fascinating as the world becomes more and more tech savvy and how technology and user-centered design can drive insane business value. It just continues to intrigue me every minute that I work on this topic.
Well, it's so great to have you here because I want to introduce our listeners to the concept of UX and UX design and the importance of that for really any modern business model. But before we get to that, if you had to pick one event in your life that just put rocket boosters behind your career, what would that be?
I would say, again, graduating from an engineering program where, you as an engineer, you look at every problem as a problem that can be solved. Is that the right problem? Is that the problem that's the most important problem? That's where a lot of times, like just because we can, you can do it shouldn't mean that you should do it, right? But the fact is, how do you prioritize of all the problems in the world? Which is where the element of user-centeredness comes into. What is the biggest pain? What is the biggest opportunity where for the users that you're building it for or they're using the system? I think that was by far, a lot of times I did my whole engineering not understanding why am I doing why am I learning what I'm learning, right? And if there was an element of like, if I understood the pain that is in the market if I learned this, how that pain would go away, for whatever. I mean, all the tools that electronic engineering would make, that's what I studied, whether that's a CPR machine, a defibrillator, whatever that is, as long as we understand how the users use it, then you build it much better and much cleaner, and then you're much more purposeful. And I think that is by far, I would say, the biggest learning. Once you start appreciating how people use it or want to use it, it's such a powerful way to go at it.
That's excellent. We're recording this in early 2023, and over the Christmas holiday, my wife got a scent diffuser that plugs into the wall, and it came. It is controlled by an app on her phone, and the setup process was wildly complicated, and to use this device was also it's wildly over-engineered for something as simple as a scent diffuser should be. So this episode, we're going to be focusing on the consumer and the tool of user experience design. I would say that my wife's scent diffuser was a failure in user experience design. Before we get into data literacy, can you give our listeners a crash course on UX design and the company you run, UX Reactor?
Absolutely. So let me start with the word UX design, and there's the secret lies in that word itself, or that phrasing itself. UX design is understanding who the user for a system is, understanding their experience. The X stands for experience. Understanding how their experience should be, exactly to what you said. Your wife's experience wasn't thought through, and then you design that experience, and then you engineer it. So unfortunately, a lot of companies do it the wrong way. They engineer it, then they figure out what the design is, and then they figure out what the experience could be, and then they figure out, okay, users will be whoever and anyone, and that's where the fundamental pitfall is. But UX design, and that's what we do, is we start with the user, understand them, observe them, immerse ourselves in their shoes, then understand what that experience is and should be, and then we design that and iterate on it, and then we work with engineering to kind of make that work. And that's why we're a very successful product strategy firm that helps products and platforms leverage the power of UX design, and unlock millions and billions of dollars of value.
Thank you for that explanation. That was very, very clear. So let's now move to the related concept of data literacy. Data and UX design really have to go hand in hand. When you hear this phrase, data literacy, what does it mean to you?
Again, going back to the basics, data is whatever the data is, and literacy is, do you understand it? Can you interpret it in a way that you can make usefulness out of it, or useful impact out of it. So in my word, that's what data literacy means. It means that you have sources to get the data, you have constantly access to the data, and you can make sense out of it in a way that can make impact. That's what data literacy for me is.
Excellent. Now, as managing partner of UX Reactor, you're in a unique position to see the impact of data literacy, or alternatively, the lack thereof, in the clients that you serve. Can you connect the dots for us between the skill of data literacy and creating those great user or customer experiences?
Absolutely. See, oftentimes when I meet with leaders and engage with them, the question that I always coach them on is that an assumption or is that a fact? And a lot of times what happens is people have a hypothesis. A lot of founders have hypotheses. A lot of leaders have hypotheses. This is what we should be doing, but that's not data. That is a hypothesis. A fact is as a data set that can be replicated again and again, and that's where I think a lot of people have a pitfall. Many people, in fact, the challenge is people don't have telemetry today in this world to understand where, and data that's coming through telemetry, to understand what the users are doing, how they're doing it, where the pitfalls are, and they just release a product assuming it'll just magically work, and then therefore you still have 40% of the product and features failing because of product market fit. But if data was constantly captured and you continuously are evolving around it, it's a very different picture altogether. You have companies that are adjusting, evolving, and especially in this day and age where code can be written overnight, or engineering can work on it over a weekend and can fix things. You need to have that rapid relationship of like, this is what's happening, then how do we adjust to it, and so on and so forth. But then it's not as easy as I say it, because it's also making sure that you have the right data coming and it's structured in the right way. You are analyzing it and then interpreting it in the right way. And we always say in the user research side, where we're capturing data around user insights, there are 5 ways to screw it up. You can speak to the wrong user. You can ask the wrong questions to the users and get the wrong data. You can interpret it wrong. You can synthesize it and document it wrong. And more importantly, you can curate it and share it wrong. There's so many ways that data can be or it can be screwed up with, that you have to be very, very careful that you take that data and make the right use of it to make impact.
Before we break for a really short commercial, I want to take a tangent to that question, which is the concept of cognitive bias. You work with executives all over the world. How do you coach executives on their own kind of built-in cognitive biases, and how to avoid that?
So I think the foundation of anything is like, hey, you go whenever we are running a workshop or a discussion or a brainstorming session, we say every idea is good and safe. Let's experiment. The cost of experimentation today is close to $0, right? And to kind of put something out there, again, I mean, just put it out there. Let's see how that works, and let's get data out of it and see whether that's working or not working, or how that's resonating or not resonating. Before we even build and write a line of code, it's 100 times more expensive when something is engineered. If you can adjust that earlier in the process, if you can even triangulate the data around whether users like it, not like it, use it, do they find it easy or not. Like even going back to the example of the diffuser that your wife used. What if they had brought in like 5 or 6 people like your wife, and then tested the product and evaluated it, adjusted it, and then iterated on it before they released it? Because think about it. I mean, they probably built so many units of these. They will have a high return rate, and if they have a high return rate, now what do? There's a loss that they're going to make. But if they actually iterated on it, adjusted it, thought through the journey, and then targeted it, they would probably have, even if they saved a 10% return rate, that's still millions of dollars of value that can be created. But that's kind of where the subtlety of running an experiment and building it. Just because everyone is doing an app for every device out there doesn't mean you need to do that too. That's the wrong data. That's a hypothesis. But if you can say that for your diffuser you can actually use better, and so on and so forth. Like, for example, I have a sprinkler system. It's a winter storm today in the California area. And the sprinkler system automatically senses that there's a rainstorm, and it'll not use water today. That's okay. That's smart. Setting it up was less than 20 minutes. Now, and for me, that saves my water bill. That saves that. So that they understand the problems that goes into it, especially when you're in a drought. And that's when your user, you're designing for your user, and you're building for them. And also, I mean, all the software companies that are out there that have a certification system, like you are, Microsoft certified, ServiceNow certified, Oracle certified. That's just an example that it's too complex that people have to be certified in it.
Well, Satyam, let's take a brief break for a quick commercial, and we'll be right back. Thanks for listening to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andrew Tempe. In my book, Balancing Act, Teach, Coach, Mentor, Inspire, I explore the characteristics required of leaders who must find balance between strength and vulnerability, confidence and selflessness, passion and measure, and leadership and followership. Balancing Act is available today at Amazon.com. And we're back with Satyam talking about data literacy and its relationship with UX design. Satyam, it's 2023 and businesses are just awash in data. There's a lot of talk about monetizing and leveraging data to help create competitive advantage, but many businesses fail to do this effectively. In your assessment, what are the primary blockers for a business or institution to unlock the value of the data they're generating?
I think data is like, the answer is always there, out there. Like, the solution to cancer is out there. Finding it is the pain, right? The data is the same way. Like the answer is in the data. So therefore, you have to go back to the basics, is understanding what are you trying to solve? What kind of data do you need? Be deliberate about it, and run and collate that data, structure that data, and then evolve and adjust around that. I think what's happening today is, yes, I mean, my footprint is out there. And I often joke, half jokingly say that Facebook can be the best dating service out there because it knows everything that I do and knows what my friends do and what I like or not like, and can actually tell me that hey, you should date this person, or and the same way, and on the vice versa. Is like same for finding a person to join your team, and you know what the culture of a company is, and if that data is available with a lot of the things that the companies say. If Google was to read all my emails and all the things that's going on with the Google workspace, they know what kind of company we are, and they know what kind of person would be a fit for this. So this, again, the answers are always in the data, but knowing how we want to leverage it, what problems you want to solve it, the companies that are able to leverage that, and more importantly, experiment with that data. What of times, data gives you a directionality, especially in the context of innovation, which is what our line of work. You take that data, you kind of build a few hypotheses, and then you can rapidly, experiment with them and say, hey, like exactly to the same thing I said. What we have data around a company and what they talk about, what they engage on, what's important to them. And then here's all the people that are out there that are looking for a job or searching for a job. Maybe we can kind of find a matchmaking there. And matchmaking is all about data. Because our footprint and our signatures as individuals in today's world is very deep, and if you use it in the right way, a lot of other things can be unlocked. I mean, the right programs, a lot of guidance and support can be provided there. But running that rapid experiment and saying, okay, if we build this, how would that work, and how would we adjust on that? In each of those experiments, if they become successful, are billion-dollar opportunities. So I think in 2023, obviously we know it's hyper digitized, partially because of the pandemic that we just went through. But more importantly, with all the data that's coming on in the tech, with the tech enablement that we have had, if we can start making more effective, life problems, solutions for life problems, I think we will actually really have a very successful 2023.
Excellent. Do you in your consulting practice, do you find that we've always done it this way, or the status quo gets in the way of creating great UX experiences?
Absolutely. The larger the company, the more the status quo hits it, because there's just so many people who have inertia built in, and we see that fairly often, and that's why our sweet spot is to work with mid-sized organizations. We work with large organizations only if you're working with the C-level of the C-level or the CEO of the companies, because that's where change can be impacted. But predominantly, it is the smaller you are, the more effective you can kind of experiment, adjust, be agile, and that's kind of the true effect of doing something with the data. Everyone has the data. Everyone knows what the right thing to do is, and at least and from a hypothesis perspective. But then they're concerned about what happens to status quo, what happens to existing customers, what happens to so and so, and that is basically gets an paralysis that unfortunately is very hard to survive. We worked with a company, to just give an example, was a double-digit $1 million in value when we started working with them. 2.5 years later, they are now we worked with them for 2.5 years, but now 5 years after they started the journey, they are valued at over $3.5 billion and growing 300% year over year. And their biggest competitor at that point, this large company, has just been taken private and the CEO has been replaced. Right? That's what happens when it's not that the large company did not know what the right thing to do was. It's just that they were just stuck there, and the data was all there. In fact, they had more data because they had existing users that were using all the products, but they just couldn't act fast enough because that mentality that it's getting to where what you got you here won't get you there, and business is always an act after another act, and every act has to be recomposed. I think people don't realize that. So that's what I just to answer your question. A lot of leaders, I see that pitfall, and we coach them on that. And times when we see that they are they think their own issues are going to come in their way, then we kind of also have a conversation that maybe we are not the right partner to kind of accelerate that.
Right. Yeah, if you're listening to this and you're in the consulting game, make sure that that partner relationship is really a two-way street. Satyam, where should improving data literacy sit amongst the dozens of competing training priorities that an organization faces? Is data literacy a top 10 skill of the future?
Absolutely. I think because if you know in the military, and I come from a military family, uh, there was actually a fascinating article I read the other day, which said that the special forces in the military looks for paranoid people, and paranoid people are always looking for what could go wrong, what could go wrong, what could go wrong. So that's the data that they are looking for, but means that they are also highly situationally aware, and they look at everything possibly. They're constantly looking at threat and friend analysis in their mind. But that's how they are interpreting data. So, but many people don't even know that situational awareness looks like this way. That if something is out of place, that means it's wrong. If you see a new person, that's kind of wrong. So you constantly are looking at data and interpreting it differently. So as I mentioned, like everyone has the data. Literacy is when you understand it enough that you can make impact with it, and so absolutely, I think I when I finished my master's thesis, I studied something called human factors, which is how humans interact with systems. And how do you factor that human element into any system that's being designed? It was predominantly a military, centered focus when I started my line of studies, but today it's obviously everywhere. The key thing that was mentioned was understanding how that data of how humans interact can build that system much more effectively. But when we look at literacy today, many people don't understand that. They don't even think about it. So they don't even understand. So I think to your question, literacy is way more important because they need, like I can see words in English written in languages like French or in Spanish, but I can't understand it and I can't act on it. And that's why literacy, I think, is a bigger training, is how do you interpret it? How do you factor it into your decision making? I think that is a bigger skill. And when people start having that, they start becoming, that unlocks a power in their decision making that they never had. And then everything becomes so much more easier because, just like you go to, a Hispanic country and suddenly you understand how does those English words, our alphabets are now working well in Spanish. It suddenly opens up all the conversations and possibilities. The same as applies for the literacy part of data. It's a top 10 skill. I think it's a life skill.
Excellent. Excellent. So as we begin to close out the show, without giving away any state secrets from UX Reactor, what are the two most important data-driven insights that you advise your clients to capture on a routine basis? What data moves the needle the most in UX design?
You asked me for two, I'll give you four. And I say this with every leader. I say, go and ask anyone in your company or go and poll people in your company. Can they name your top users for the company? Can they define the top problems and pain points that they have for that particular user? And can they discuss and share what are some of the top things that are happening for those problems within your purview that you're working on? And finally, do you know how that how you'll measure the success that you've solved those problems? And that is the real factor that you need to think through when anyone says I'm a user-centered company, I'm a customer-obsessed company, all the words that are getting used to that. If they can't answer these four, and the answer is the same for everybody in the company, you're not user-centered. And that data itself will tell you very quickly that how likely are you that you will be successful. And it's just fascinating that just like many people don't know who their main users are, what their pain points are, how what they are doing impacts them, and what's the measure of success.
Right. Thank you for sharing that list. I'm sure our listeners will get a great deal of value taking that back into their businesses. But before I let you go, Satyam, please tell our listeners a bit about your new book, where they can find it, and what are you most excited about for your business in 2023 and beyond?
Absolutely. So to start with, the book is So there's a lot of books written about user experience design, but what was not written is how is it actually a multiplier for business growth. So this book that I curated as actually a result of how we practice at UX Reactor, a collection of 27 different plays that we put together, a highly illustrated book. It effectively allows leaders to understand and business stakeholders to understand how do they drive insane business growth through user-centered practices. How do they build, great data insights? How do they act on it? How do they experiment on it? How do you kind of measure your success, etc.? It's published by Wiley, so it's available on all possible places you can buy a book: Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Target, etc. If people want to know more about the book, we have a landing site for them. It's uxtplaybook.com, and people can find more details there. And what am I excited about in 2023? I think that there's obviously clouds of possible recession and so on and so forth. But for me, I mean, that's a huge opportunity because that allows, when everyone's running 100 miles an hour, it's very hard to stop and think about, am I going the right direction? Because the rising tide lifts everyone. But now as a recession kind of is being discussed, or people are starting to think through stuff, I'm really excited about working with organizations that are actually willing to reflect and say, is it the right thing to do versus that just go along with it. I still strongly believe there's a gazillion life problems out there to solve through technology, and the intersection of understanding what the pain points with people that are using that technology is, and whether that's education, healthcare, agriculture, we actually can work through all that stuff. And so I'm really excited about working with some really fun initiatives and people.
That's excellent. So thank you so much for joining us today and providing your insights for our listeners. My name is Andy Temte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find this show on all major podcast streaming services, as well as out on YouTube. And please like the show, subscribe, rate, share with your friends. This is going to be a particularly good episode for you to share if you're one of those that says we have a maniacal focus on the customer. This episode is going to unlock a lot of the how behind that. So thank you, Satyam.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andy, for having me.